And now, as a special wedding gift from her loving brother, Ethan Carter has agreed to give the newlyweds his penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. The applause hit the room before I could even process the words. Hundreds of hands came together beneath glittering chandeliers, and for a moment I honestly thought I had misunderstood what the master of ceremonies had just said. I sat frozen at my table near the back of the ballroom, my champagne glass suspended halfway to my lips. Around me, guests smiled and nodded as though they were witnessing a heartwarming family moment. My sister Olivia stood beside her new husband at the center of the dance floor, one hand pressed dramatically against her chest. My father, Robert, beamed with pride. My mother, Linda, dabbed at the corner of her eye as if she were overwhelmed with emotion. The only problem was that nobody had bothered to tell me. The penthouse they were talking about belonged to me. I had spent 10 years building my business from a folding table in a tiny apartment before I could afford it. Every square foot represented sacrifices nobody else had seen. The long nights, the failed investments, the weekends spent working while my friends traveled and celebrated. Yet somehow, according to the story unfolding in front of nearly 300 wedding guests, it was now being presented as a gift I had generously offered to my sister. The applause continued. Several relatives turned toward me and smiled approvingly. One uncle even raised his glass in my direction. I forced a polite smile because I didn't know what else to do. My pulse was steady, but something cold settled deep in my stomach. Then I noticed something else. On every table sat a small printed card describing the wedding sponsors. At the very top, beneath my parents' names, were the words, "Special housing gift provided by Ethan Carter." I stared at the card for several seconds. My name had been printed. The story had been prepared. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a spontaneous joke. Someone had planned this. Across the ballroom, Olivia finally looked in my direction. Instead of appearing surprised or embarrassed, she quickly looked away. That single movement told me more than any speech could have. She knew. My father stepped onto the stage and accepted the microphone. "Family takes care of family," he said warmly, drawing another wave of applause. And Ethan has always been blessed with success. More clapping followed. More smiles. More people looking toward me as though I should stand and take a bow. I glanced around the room. Everyone seemed happy. Everyone seemed aware of a gift that existed only in their version of reality. Everyone except me. That was the moment I realized something was very wrong. Not because my parents were speaking for me. They had done that my entire life. Not because Olivia was accepting credit she hadn't earned. I was used to that too. No, what unsettled me was the certainty on their faces. They weren't hoping I would agree. They already believed I had no choice. And somewhere near the front of the ballroom, sitting quietly with her silver cane resting across her lap, my grandmother Evelyn watched the entire scene without saying a single word. The celebration continued as if nothing unusual had happened. A string quartet played near the stage while servers moved gracefully between tables carrying plates of filet mignon and roasted vegetables. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath the ballroom lights. Laughter echoed across the room. Yet the longer I sat there, the more I realized I was the only person who seemed confused. Guests approached my table one after another. Each conversation sounded almost identical. "Congratulations, Ethan. That is incredibly generous. Your sister is so lucky to have a brother like you." I smiled politely every time. I thanked them. I shook hands. I listened. What else could I do? Correcting them would have created a scene, and somehow I felt that was exactly what someone wanted. A few minutes later, my cousin Mark pulled out his phone and showed me a photograph. It was a picture of Olivia and her husband standing in front of my building. I recognized the entrance immediately. The caption beneath the image read, "Future home sweet home." My stomach tightened. The photograph had been posted 3 days earlier. 3 days. That meant the story had been circulating long before the wedding began. As I scrolled through the comments, I found dozens of congratulations from relatives, family friends, and even people I barely knew. Everyone believed the penthouse was already part of the wedding gift. Everyone except the person who supposedly gave it away. I handed the phone back and forced another smile. Across the ballroom, my parents seemed relaxed, almost relieved. My father was laughing with several business associates. My mother was accepting compliments from guests who praised the close bond within our family. Neither of them appeared worried that I might object. Their confidence bothered me more than the lie itself. It suggested preparation, planning, Assumptions built over months rather than days. Then I noticed Olivia again. She stood near the wedding cake speaking with a group of bridesmaids. When our eyes met this time, she quickly looked down at the floor. That tiny reaction stayed with me. People who believed they had done nothing wrong usually held eye contact. People carrying secrets often did not. The band began playing a slow instrumental piece while guests drifted toward the dance floor. I used the distraction to step away from my table and walked toward the hallway outside the ballroom. The noise faded as the doors closed behind me. For the first time all evening, I could think clearly. Framed wedding photographs lined the corridor. Fresh flowers filled silver vases. Everything looked elegant and perfect. Yet standing there alone, I felt as though I had wandered into a carefully constructed performance where everyone knew their role except me. I was reaching for my phone when the ballroom doors opened again. My mother stepped into the hallway with a bright smile already prepared. She looked around to make sure nobody else was nearby. Then she gently touched my arm. "There you are," she said warmly. "Your father and I have been looking for you. We need to discuss a few details before the announcement after dinner." The announcement. Not an announcement. The announcement. As though the decision had already been made. My mother's smile never wavered. It was the same smile she had used my entire life whenever she wanted something from me. Warm on the surface, calculated underneath. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and looked at her. "What announcement?" I asked. For the briefest moment, something flickered across her face. Surprise. Then it disappeared. "Oh, do not act modest," she said with a soft laugh. "Tonight is about family. Everyone is excited." She linked her arm through mine and started guiding me farther down the hallway. "Your sister has had such a stressful year planning this wedding. The penthouse will give her and Daniel the perfect start." Hearing her speak about it so casually almost made me question my own reality. She talked as if the property had already changed hands. As if my role in the decision had been reduced to smiling for photographs. "Mom," I said carefully, "when exactly did I agree to this?" She stopped walking. Her expression tightened. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. "Ethan, this is not the time." "It seems like exactly the time." She folded her arms. "Your father and I have sacrificed a lot for this family." There it was. The familiar shift. Whenever logic failed, guilt took its place. "Olivia is starting a new chapter. You are successful. You have more than enough." More than enough. I had heard those words before. When Olivia needed help with college tuition. When she wanted a newer car. When she decided to switch careers twice in 3 years. Somehow my success always became evidence that I owed more. My mother lowered her voice. "Everyone already knows." I looked at her. "That sounds like a problem for the people who told them." Her eyes widened slightly. "Do not embarrass us tonight." I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because I suddenly understood the situation much more clearly. This was never a request. Requests allow the possibility of refusal. This had been presented as a completed decision because they believed public pressure would force my compliance. The ballroom doors opened again. My father stepped into the hallway carrying 2 champagne flutes. He immediately sensed the tension. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Ethan is being difficult," my mother replied before I could speak. My father sighed heavily, as though I were a child creating unnecessary problems. "Son, we can discuss details later. Tonight should be about celebrating your sister." "Then why am I hearing about legal transfers and public announcements?" I asked. He handed one of the glasses to my mother. "Because families help each other." The answer was so automatic that I wondered how many times they had rehearsed it. Then my father reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. He held it casually, but my attention locked onto it immediately. "Speaking of details," he said, "there are a few documents we should review before dessert." My heartbeat remained steady, but every doubt disappeared. The photograph, the printed cards, the speeches, the conversations. None of it had been spontaneous. They had arrived at this wedding expecting signatures. And somewhere inside the ballroom, my grandmother Evelyn was still watching in silence. My father extended the envelope toward me as though he were offering a dinner menu. His expression remained calm, confident, almost bored. That confidence told me everything. He truly believed the outcome had already been decided. I did not reach for the envelope. Instead, I looked at it for a few seconds before lifting my eyes back to his face. "You brought legal documents to a wedding?" I asked. My father shrugged. It seemed efficient. Efficient. The word lingered in my mind. Not meaningful. Not emotional. Efficient. As though transferring my home was no different from signing a catering invoice. My mother stepped closer. Please do not make this harder than it needs to be. I almost smiled. Harder for whom? Certainly not for me. I had spent years learning how to solve difficult problems. Building a business from nothing had taught me patience. It had taught me discipline. Most importantly, it had taught me to recognize patterns. And standing in that hallway, I suddenly began seeing one very clearly. The penthouse was not the real story. The real story had started decades earlier. I thought about my childhood home in suburban Illinois. Olivia and I had grown up under the same roof, eaten at the same dinner table, attended the same schools. Yet somehow the rules had always been different. When Olivia forgot an assignment, the teacher was unfair. When I forgot one, I needed to be more responsible. When Olivia changed her college major twice, she was finding herself. When I worked 80-hour weeks building my company, my parents called me obsessed. At family gatherings, every achievement eventually became about her. If I bought a new car, someone would mention that Olivia deserved one too. If I received a promotion, someone would ask whether I could help Olivia with her rent. The requests had never stopped. They had only become larger over time. A loan became another loan. A favor became an expectation. An expectation became an obligation. Looking back, I realized something unsettling. Nobody had ever directly asked me whether I wanted to carry that role. It had simply been assigned to me. My mother's voice pulled me back to the present. Your sister has always looked up to you. I glanced at her. That is not the same thing as being entitled to my property. Her expression hardened slightly. My father let out a slow breath. You are focusing on the wrong thing. Then explain the right thing. For a moment, neither of them answered. The silence itself felt revealing. Finally, my father tapped the envelope with 2 fingers. The right thing is keeping the family together. I looked at the papers again. Then I looked through the ballroom doors. Guests continued laughing. Glasses clinked. Music drifted across the room. Most of them had no idea a private negotiation was unfolding only a few feet away. Then my eyes found my grandmother. She remained seated at her table near the front. Unlike everyone else, she was not smiling. She was not celebrating. She was simply watching. Our eyes met across the crowded room. For the first time that evening, I noticed something unusual. Resting beside her dinner plate was a thick cream-colored envelope sealed with a dark blue ribbon. And judging by the calm certainty in her gaze, she already knew exactly what was about to happen next. The longer I stood there, the more obvious it became that my parents were waiting for me to surrender. They were not arguing. They were not negotiating. They were simply waiting for me to accept the role they had already written for me. My father still held the envelope in one hand. My mother kept glancing toward the ballroom as if she were worried someone might notice the conversation taking longer than expected. You are overthinking this, she finally said. Olivia needs a place to start her married life. You have more space than you could ever use. I almost asked how many times she had repeated that sentence to other people during the past few months. Instead, I remained silent. Silence often reveals more than questions. People become uncomfortable and begin filling the empty space themselves. My father did exactly that. We have already spoken with several people about the transition, he said. Everything is practically arranged. That caught my attention immediately. Transition. Not possibility. Not proposal. Transition. Another word that assumed ownership had already changed. Several people? I asked. My father nodded. Financial advisors. Family friends. Olivia and Daniel have already started discussing design ideas. For a moment, I simply stared at him. They had not only promised my property, they had apparently been planning its future. New furniture, new decorations, new memories, all inside a home that still belonged to me. My mother softened her voice. You should be happy for your sister. There it was again. Every concern transformed into selfishness. Every objection transformed into a moral failure. It was a familiar pattern, one I had lived with for years without fully acknowledging it. Then a memory surfaced unexpectedly. I was 16 years old, standing in the driveway beside an old pickup truck I had spent an entire summer saving for. My first vehicle. I still remembered how proud I felt handing over the cash. 2 weeks later, Olivia wanted a car too. Somehow the conversation shifted from celebrating my accomplishment to discussing what I could contribute toward hers. Different year, different circumstances, same script. I looked through the ballroom doors once more. Guests were taking photographs near the wedding. Cake. Some were laughing. Others were dancing. None of them knew that a decision had already been made on my behalf months ago. Then I noticed something else. My grandmother was no longer sitting alone. A man in a dark suit had quietly joined her table. I did not recognize him. He appeared to be in his late 50s, carrying a leather briefcase that rested beside his chair. The two of them exchanged a few calm words. Then he opened the briefcase and removed several folders. My grandmother did not seem surprised to see him. In fact, she looked as though she had been expecting him all evening. My mother followed my gaze and immediately stiffened. "Why is he here?" she whispered. My father turned toward the ballroom. The confidence that had carried him through the evening flickered for the first time. Just for a second. But I saw it. And suddenly, for the first time all night, I realized I might not be the only person who had arrived with a plan. My mother's reaction lasted less than a second, but it was enough. The calm certainty she had carried throughout the evening cracked for the first time. My father immediately recovered and straightened his jacket. "Probably another guest," he said. Yet he did not sound convinced. Neither of them moved toward the ballroom. Neither of them returned to the celebration. Instead, they remained beside me, watching the man with the briefcase. That told me everything I needed to know. They recognized him. The ballroom lights reflected softly off the polished floor as guests continued enjoying the reception. The music grew louder. A photographer gathered relatives near the stage for group pictures. Life inside the room moved forward normally, but beneath the surface something had shifted. My grandmother slowly rose from her chair. At 82 years old, she moved carefully, supported by her cane, yet there was nothing uncertain about her posture. The man beside her stood as well. Together, they began walking toward the center of the ballroom. Several guests noticed and stepped aside. Conversations gradually faded. People smiled politely, assuming she was preparing to offer wedding blessings. Even Olivia turned toward her with a relieved expression. My grandmother had always been respected within the family. If she spoke, people listened. "We should stop this," my mother whispered. The words were so quiet I almost missed them. My father shook his head immediately. "Not here." That response surprised me. Stop what? Why would my grandmother's presence concern them at all? I followed them back into the ballroom. Guests were returning to their seats. The master of ceremonies handed my grandmother a microphone with a warm smile. She thanked him and looked around the room. The entire ballroom fell silent. "Before the evening continues," she said calmly, "there is something I would like to clarify." Her voice was not loud, but it carried effortlessly through the room. Years of confidence seemed to fill every word. Olivia glanced nervously toward my parents. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside her. My father crossed his arms. My mother stared at the floor. I had never seen either of them look so uneasy. My grandmother rested one hand on the microphone and the other on her cane. "Families are built on trust," she continued. "And trust requires honesty." Several guests exchanged curious looks. The atmosphere changed instantly. This no longer sounded like a wedding toast. It sounded like the beginning of something else. Then she turned slightly and gestured toward the man with the briefcase. "Some of you may not know Mr. Harrison Wells. He has been my attorney for nearly 20 years. The room became even quieter. I noticed my father's jaw tighten. The attorney opened his briefcase and removed several neatly organized folders. My grandmother accepted one of them, but did not open it yet. Instead, she looked directly at me. Her expression softened, just slightly, enough for me to recognize something I had not felt all evening. Reassurance. Then she turned back toward the crowd and said 7 words that caused every person in the room to focus completely on her. "There are facts that everyone deserves to know." The silence that followed seemed to stretch across the entire ballroom. Even the servers stopped moving. My grandmother slowly opened the folder in her hands while Mr. Wells remained beside her. Nobody interrupted. Nobody dared. "Several months ago," she began, "I became aware of conversations regarding a certain property." Her eyes moved briefly toward my parents. At first, I assumed there had been a misunderstanding. Families sometimes communicate poorly. Unfortunately, that was not the case. A ripple of unease moved through the room. Guests exchanged glances. My father shifted his weight. My mother kept her eyes fixed on the floor. My grandmother continued. "The residence being discussed this evening was never intended to become a wedding gift. In fact, it cannot legally become a wedding gift through pressure, assumptions, or public announcements." Mr. Wells opened another folder and removed several documents. I noticed multiple signatures and official seals. The attorney handed one page to my grandmother. She barely glanced at it before speaking again. Many years ago, I established a family trust. That trust was designed to support future generations fairly and responsibly. The word fairly seemed to hang in the air. Part of that trust funded opportunities for my grandchildren. Educational support, business support, housing support. Olivia's expression changed. Confusion replaced confidence. She looked toward my parents, clearly searching for answers. None came. When Ethan began building his company, my grandmother said, I chose to help him through that trust. Not because he asked. He never did. I helped because I believed in his work ethic and his character. I felt dozens of eyes turned toward me. For the first time all evening, I understood why my grandmother had remained so calm. She had known far more than I realized. The property everyone has been discussing tonight, she continued, exists within a legal structure specifically designed to protect it from improper transfers and outside pressure. Mr. Wells nodded. Any attempt to transfer ownership without the required conditions would be invalid, my grandmother added. A low murmur spread across the room. Guests who had spent hours congratulating Olivia suddenly seemed unsure what to think. Then my grandmother closed the folder and looked directly at my parents. What concerns me is not the misunderstanding itself. What concerns me is that certain individuals spent months presenting assumptions as facts. My father's face turned pale. My mother finally looked up. Evelyn, she said softly, this is not necessary. My grandmother's expression remained composed. Actually, Linda, honesty is always necessary. The room fell silent again. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. My grandmother rested both hands on her cane and took a slow breath. What I have shared so far is only the background. The more important matter involves several conversations, emails, and proposals that were sent during the past 6 months. She turned toward Mr. Wells. The attorney opened another folder, noticeably thicker than the first. My father's confidence vanished completely. My mother closed her eyes. And for the first time that evening, I realized the documents in my father's envelope were not the only papers prepared before this wedding. Mr. Wells removed several printed emails and placed them carefully on the table beside my grandmother. The room was so quiet that I could hear the faint hum of the ballroom lights overhead. Nobody was interested in the wedding cake anymore. Nobody was looking at the dance floor. Every eye remained fixed on the documents. My grandmother adjusted her glasses and picked up the first page. Over the past 6 months, she said calmly, I received multiple reports regarding efforts to influence the future ownership of Ethan's residence. My father immediately stepped forward. This has gone far enough. His voice was firm, but it lacked the confidence it had carried earlier in the evening. My grandmother did not even look at him. I agree, she replied. That is why we are finally discussing it openly. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others leaned forward. The truth had become impossible to ignore. Mr. Wells handed another document to my grandmother. This email was sent 4 months ago, she continued. It discusses renovation ideas for a property that did not belong to the individuals making those plans. Olivia's face drained of color. What? She whispered. She looked at my parents again. Dad, my father said. Nothing. My grandmother turned another page. This document contains projected moving dates, furniture purchases, and proposed ownership arrangements. A murmur spread through the ballroom. Several relatives exchanged shocked glances. The story everyone had been told was beginning to collapse under its own weight. Olivia stepped away from the head table. I do not understand, she said. You told me Ethan wanted this. My mother finally spoke. Olivia, sweetheart, this is not the time. Then when is the time? Olivia asked. Her voice trembled. Because everyone here thinks I asked for something that was never mine. For the first time all evening, she sounded less like a favored daughter and more like someone realizing she had been used. My grandmother lowered the papers and looked directly at her. You are not responsible for assumptions that others created on your behalf. Olivia stared at her, speechless. Then my grandmother revealed the final piece. 3 weeks ago, I instructed Mr. Wells to conduct a complete review of all trust-related communications. That review uncovered repeated attempts to pressure, influence, and accelerate decisions that were never authorized. The words landed heavily across the room. Not accusations. Facts. Calm. Precise. Impossible to dismiss. My father looked exhausted. My mother appeared defeated. The confidence that had fueled their plan had vanished entirely. Then my grandmother reached for the cream-colored envelope tied with the dark blue ribbon. The same envelope I had noticed earlier. She held it in both hands and looked around the ballroom. "Everything we have discussed tonight concerns the past," she said quietly. "What happens next concerns the future." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the photographers had lowered their cameras. My grandmother untied the ribbon slowly and removed a single folded document. When she looked up again, her gaze settled on my parents. "After reviewing everything," she said, "I made a decision this morning." My grandmother unfolded the document and held it calmly in front of her. Nobody spoke. The entire ballroom seemed suspended in a moment that nobody could predict. "For many years," she said, "I believed that fairness meant giving people repeated opportunities to do the right thing." Her eyes moved across the room before settling briefly on my parents. "Today I learned that fairness without accountability becomes permission." The words landed softly, yet they carried more weight than any argument could have. She turned to Mr. Wells, who nodded and handed copies of the document to several people seated nearby. Then she continued, "Effective immediately, I have amended the distribution plan for my trust." A collective murmur swept through the ballroom. My father closed his eyes. My mother gripped the edge of a chair. Neither of them looked surprised. They looked defeated. Future trust oversight will no longer involve individuals who attempted to pressure, manipulate, or misrepresent trust assets for personal benefit, my grandmother said. Instead, responsibility will be placed with independent trustees and beneficiaries who have demonstrated integrity. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse anyone directly. She simply stated the decision. That made it impossible to argue with. Olivia looked stunned. "Grandma," she whispered, "I never wanted any of this." My grandmother's expression softened. "I know, dear." Olivia's eyes filled with tears. Not dramatic tears, just the quiet kind that appear when someone finally understands the truth. She turned toward me. "Ethan, I am sorry." I believed her. For the first time that evening, I truly believed her. She had been part of the story, but she had not written it. My father finally stepped forward. "Mother, please. We can discuss this privately." My grandmother shook her head. "No, Robert. Private conversations are how we arrived here." The room remained silent. No applause. No interruptions. Just the uncomfortable stillness that follows honesty. Then my grandmother folded the document and placed it back into the envelope. "A family should never treat one member as a resource to be managed," she said. "Success is not an obligation. Love is not a contract. And respect cannot exist where entitlement takes its place." Nobody challenged her. Nobody could. The facts had already spoken for themselves. A few minutes later, guests slowly returned to their conversations. The music resumed. The wedding continued. But everything felt different now. The illusion was gone. I walked toward my grandmother's table. She looked up and smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that needed no explanation. "Are you all right?" she asked. I thought about the speeches, the assumptions, the documents, and the months of planning that had led to this moment. Then I looked around the ballroom. For the first time all evening, I felt completely calm. "Yes," I said. "I think I finally am." My grandmother patted my hand. "Good," she replied. "Because your future belongs to you. Never let anyone convince you otherwise." Later that night, I left the reception beside her. Behind us, the celebration continued. Ahead of us, the city lights reflected across the dark waters of Lake Michigan. I realized something as we stepped into the cool evening air. My grandmother had never raised her voice once. She had not needed revenge fueled by anger. She had simply revealed the truth. And in the end, the truth had silenced everyone.